Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this morning's webinar. As you're probably aware by now, my name's Jim, and I'm the rPlace Program Manager. I'm here today to help facilitate today's CBA webinar, and shortly I'll be handing over to David Morris, who some of you will know from CBA events, from New Economy, who'll be talking you through all things CBA. As you know, we've been offering CBA support and advice since the start of the rPlace program, with events held in the spring and again in the autumn. We've all gone through the logic modelling exercise, which resulted in 55 areas being recommended to complete CBA as part of your operational plan. Furthermore, the logic modelling exercise enabled easier identification of key themes, and from this point onwards, our proposed CBA support will be targeted at areas delivering similar themed proposals. Hence today, this invite is for all areas, and there's 7 of you, to have a sort of focus on health advice and or promotion. So hopefully we can be more focused and targeted during this session, and specifically linked to you as areas around health and promotion. Before I start, I'd just like to go through some housekeeping with you. I'd like to let you know the presentation slides you see on screen today will be emailed to you after the event, so that you can take a look at them again, and that will also include the worked example that David will talk you through for the majority of the session. During this presentation, we'll also be running a number of polls. There's 2 polls, and this is a chance for you to give our presenters some feedback. When we run the polls, you will see a blue box appear on your screen, and all you need to do is select the options that relates to you and click it with the mouse. We'll also have options for questions and answer sessions throughout the presentation, I think on at least 2 occasions. If you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you will see there is a control panel. In the bottom half of that panel is an area for you to type questions. We will be pausing to answer some of the questions you are sending to us, I say at intervals during the next hour and a half, 2 hours. Any questions that we don't get a chance to answer will be passed to the rPlace team, who'll get in touch with you via email. I should also say, before I hand over to David, that there will be an opportunity towards the end of the session where we can unmute you, and one by one you can give some feedback and talk to David about maybe the challenges you're facing, a particular issue around your CBA. So we will be doing that later on in the session. Just for your information. Okay then, without further ado, I will hand you over to David. Okay, thank you, David.
Thanks, Jim, and good morning to everybody who's on the webinar. Some of you I will have met at the various rPlace presentations on CBA and the training on CBA that we ran earlier on in the autumn. But for those of you who haven't met, hello. As Jim said, I'm David Morris, I'm Head of Evaluation here at New Economy. And I'm going to talk you through today the cost-benefit analysis model that we've developed, which some of you hopefully will be familiar with, and showing you that it's not quite as scary as perhaps it first looks when you open it for the first time. The agenda for today's webinar, I'm going to start off just spending 10 minutes or so walking you through a blank version of the Excel tool, the Excel model that our CBA approach uses. I'm not going to spend too long on that, because I'm guessing that quite a few of you have already opened it up, looked at it, read the guidance that accompanies it, or worked with your relationship managers understanding it. But I'll just walk you through to remind you of those elements of it and to sort of reorientate you. I'm then going to give an example of a health advice cost-benefit analysis that we've been involved in recently. It's an example from a city council from within England. They submitted this example as part of their Transformation Challenge Award, which was a program that DCLG ran for local authorities to bid in for funding. And one of the things that DCLG made a requirement of that process was that local authorities and their partners completed a cost benefit of their proposals. So I will talk you through that one and hopefully make the whole process slightly more tangible thereby. And then, as Jim said, we'll switch over to get updates from each of the areas that was on this call, on this webinar, to hear how you've progressed your cost-benefit analysis, any troubles or challenges you're facing, any questions you might have, and I'll endeavour to answer them. And then we'll conclude up with next steps and question and answer. Just before I go into the CBA model walkthrough, we have the first of the two polls that Jim mentioned. This first poll is to give me an idea of how much progress each area on the webinar has made with their cost-benefit analysis. So Jim's just about to launch the poll now, but the question then is, how much progress have you made? And there are four options: no progress, a little, moderate amount, or a lot. So if we could ask you to begin voting now, and that will just give me an idea of where you are each on the progress you've made. Okay. So a few of you have voted. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Still only two answers. Are the other two attendees able to give their responses? Or are you struggling with the technology? Okay. I think given that there's only four answers, those two attendees would have answered by now. So, Jim, if you can close that poll, thanks. And if you could just share those answers. So, Jim is just going to share the results, and so we can see that, assuming that the other two haven't been able to vote or haven't voted, in a similar position. So it sounds like nobody sort of made massive progress with their CBA. Okay, thanks. That's just useful for me to understand as I frame this webinar session. So, Jim, if you could hide that poll, please, and then I will flip us over to looking at the model itself. Right. So, okay, I'm just going to go out now and into my Excel tool. Here we go. Let me see. Right. So the model that we work with, it's version 4.1 it's called. I'll just open it up here. So here's a blank version of it. So that should all now be in front of you on the screen. We designed the model so it runs in as basic a version of Excel as possible. We didn't make it all sort of WYSI software and so on because we want to make it usable. And this is the front page that you will open up to. It's probably familiar to quite a few of you. So latest version, which is 4.1, just a few notes from Julian, my colleague, on changes since previous versions, and just a reminder of the workbook structure. So blue tabs along the bottom here where you enter information, orange tabs where you get information outputs, so your benefit cost ratios, your charts, and so on. So that's the front page you're faced with. The tabs I'm going to focus on in this walkthrough are the blue tabs along the bottom. So starting with the proposition summary, this is where you need to enter information about your RPlace proposal. I'd imagine you can lift quite a lot of this from your operational plans as they stand to date. So obviously the title of your work, give an outline description. In your intervention start year here, this cell here, you need to make sure that you enter that as 2015. Press return. That just means that the model works out current prices for you. You don't need to worry about inflation. And then in terms of your analysis time frame, we often recommend that areas look over a 5 or a 10-year period. So if you enter 5, that means that all the other sheets in the model should just allow you to enter 5 years worth of data. Do remember when you're doing your modeling to use these bottom boxes, comments, caveats, next steps. This is where you write in how you've developed the modeling to date. In the caveats box, any points where you've had to make guesses, big assumptions, and sort of challenging yourself, challenging colleagues to improve upon that data. So that's a proposition summary. Then in the agency list box, this is where you need to identify all those agencies that are involved with your RPlace proposal, either in terms of spending money or in terms of saving money in future. If you're not exactly sure on who's going to be saving, who's going to be spending, you can leave all these turned on as yes. But if, for instance, you knew that you weren't doing anything around crime and criminal justice, you turn all these criminal justice agencies to no, for instance. Lots of you I know have third sector involvement in your proposals. So in these spare boxes down here, you can enter in, for instance, local charity, something like that. So if I just type that in, local charity, and then if I put that as a yes, that would just mean on things like the cost sheet, which I've just flicked over to now, you can select the local authority, local charity, there they are at the bottom of the drop-down, as an agency that was going to invest in your RPlace scheme. Here are all the other agencies as well that I've left turned on as yes. So in your agency list, have a think in your group, who are the key partners involved in this process? And remember, you can overwrite these. So if, for instance, you want to replace local authority with the name of your local borough council or your county council, you can do. So I could write over that Kent County Council or Canterbury District Council, for instance. But what I couldn't do is overwrite local authority with NHS or the police, because that would change the way the model operates. So you need to stick with the type of agency you already have. Okay, this should, remember, I will be giving you a walkthrough of a health advice example in a minute, which should reinforce these points I'm making. Moving on then, the benefits tab. So this is the main entry tab really of the model. It's quite scary, I know, when you first open it up. It seems like there's an awful lot to it, but you only really need to be entering information into the section now that I'm highlighting. So it's only really this portion of the model that you need to enter information. Everything else works out itself, so long as you've got the right data in. So to just explain how the sheet is set out, down the left-hand side here, we have a long list of outcomes. That terminology should be familiar to all of you from the logic model exercises. So you simply need to go down this list and identify where the outcomes that your RPlace model is interested in are listed. So if, for instance, you're interested in getting people off out-of-work benefits, such as job seekers allowance over here or employment support allowance, then you need to leave those outcomes included. So you need to leave the yes box toggled on. If, for instance, you're not interested in improving local resident skills, you're not about training or anything like that, then you simply turn those outcomes to no, and they will grey out, and the model will disregard them. So any numbers or percentages you put in those rows would no longer be counted. So just for now, just turn those back on, come back on. There are a whole load of outcomes down here. So as I say, go down, choose the ones that are most relevant to your RPlace model based on your logic model approach. And remember, all these specific crime ones down here, those are turned off just as default setting, but you can turn them back on. If you have outcomes which are specific to your RPlace proposal, and they're not listed in this long list here, we have included spare boxes at the bottom here. So you can write over the top of those spare 1, spare 2, spare 3, etc. The outcome that you're interested in, whatever that might be, and then you just simply turn that spare box to a yes. That box will then come into bold and it will start counting the values. If you do add spare outcomes in, you also need to remember that you will need to put a value against those outcomes. So over here in column R, you'll need to put in a fiscal benefit against that. What I'd suggest is, if your area does have additional outcomes which aren't listed in the long list of green boxes, enter it in and then get in contact with us, with your relationship manager, and we can help you work out what the pounds and pence figure over here should be. Okay, so let's imagine then you've chosen your outcomes that you're interested in. For those which you're not interested in, if you click the macro unhide all rows up here, that will just concertina down the worksheet, so you're not having to enter information against outcomes which aren't of relevance to you. Right, so you've got a sort of narrowed down worksheet. What you then need to do is start entering information about the numbers of individuals you're working with who could be helped to achieve those outcomes. So we've got things like the target population, so what's the population you're going to be working with in your neighborhood or your district. How many of those will be affected by a particular outcome? So in this top row example, how many of them will be on job seekers allowance, for instance, and you could help get into a job. And then scrolling to the right, this is where you start entering percentages into the model. And remember the blue headings at the top, if they have a percentage in brackets, that's a clue that you need to enter a percentage into these boxes instead of an integer. So you can start entering percentages who you'll be engaging with. So have you got the capacity to work with everyone who might be on job seekers allowance in your area? How many of those will stay engaged with your scheme? If your scheme involves support over several months, for instance, will a percentage of people drop out of the scheme? And then finally to the right here, what impact will you have? So what percentage of people in this example will you get into a job? And dead weight, what percentage would have achieved that outcome anyway? So remember, some people will improve their health, some people will get into a job, some people will avoid being evicted or into debt through things other than the public support they receive. So we need to acknowledge that some people are in that position. Remember, if you forget what goes in these boxes, we do have these pop-outs here. There's one here for dead weight, which just reminds you of what needs to go in each box. There's also the technical specification, which is listed on the CBA front page, which you can Google search and find very easily. So that will just remind you exactly what needs to go in each box. Okay, so that's the benefit sheet, and we'll come back to that in a minute when it's fully populated with data from our worked example. The fourth sheet that I'm going to talk you through is the cost sheet. So this is the other sheet where you will be entering the majority of your data. It's a bit more straightforward than the benefit sheet. Down the left-hand side here in column B, we need you to put down all the different cost elements, the different types of costs that are going to be related to your rPlace program. So this might be, for instance, purchase of local community facility. Then underneath that you might put refurbishment of that community facility. Then you might have staff salaries, so the people who are working in the facility, a bit of staff training if they need to learn new skills, for instance. And then underneath that you might have health referrals. So if you're going to be supporting people at the community facility but then referring them on to GPs for some specific health support, you'd need to include that cost. So down the left-hand side here, you need to pick up all the different types of costs that will be associated with a successful running of your rPlace project. You then need to, in this column C here, work out what that predicted cost is over the lifetime of your rPlace project. For some of those, it should be quite easy. So, for instance, refurbishing a building or maybe staff costs. If you have a clear idea already of how much that is going to cost you, then you can simply put those numbers straight into these cells. And then in your notes and assumptions box, you just say, based on operational plan dated whatever, or based on the recruitment of 3 staff at this salary level, for instance. So that's quite easy. For other costs, you may need to use what we call sort of ready reckoners or unit costs. So if you think, well, we're going to be referring 100 people on to a specific form of counselling, for instance, then you might need to find out, well, how much does it cost to put one person on that counselling course, and then multiply that up by the size of the population you're going to be supporting. So by both approaches, you should be able to build up a sort of rounded picture of the economic costs associated with your delivery. The benefits sheet, I'll just flick back, that has a column called dead weight, which talks about what would have happened anyway. So how many of the people we're working with would have achieved certain benefits regardless of us being here? In the costs column, we also have something relating to what would have happened anyway, but it's in a slightly different place, and it's called a slightly different thing. We call it offset costs or efficiencies. To help illustrate this, imagine, for instance, that community centre example I gave where they're going to offer some health advice. It may be by refurbishing and expanding that community facility. Two other facilities or two other services within the locality can be shut down or can be scaled back. So we'll no longer be spending money on those facilities. So we can pick up that fact that we're no longer spending money in these columns. So I'd identify costs which I'm no longer going to be incurring, thanks to my RPlace work. I total them up in this column here, and I'd explain what they are and how I'd reach from here. So I'd say, because we're going to increase the number of volunteers involved in delivering this support, that means that we can save 2 permanent members of staff who can be released to work on other things that the local authority does, or redundancies can be made in a worst case scenario. So you need to note down in this column any costs you'll save, and then the model will work out the net cost of the program for you. It will subtract the costs in column E from those in column C. Just finally on this sheet, remember also, once you've entered in different types of costs and their values, assign them to those agencies that you've identified as being part of your partnership. So if, for instance, lots of things are going to be picked up by a local charity or third sector provider, you need to note that down in this column here. Other things, it might be referrals onto mainstream NHS services, for instance. So you need to assign those to the NHS. And in this box here, also consider, are those capital revenue or in-kind costs? Important that you pick up the in-kind costs. So if volunteers are giving their time to support your RPlace proposal, or you're getting equipment or a venue free of charge, you need to try and put some value against that, because those resources could be used to do other things. So they do actually mean that there's an increased cost to the overall program. Okay, that's all I'm going to focus on just for now for costs. As I say, we'll come back to this sheet in a minute on the worked example. Just flicking over, the last thing I was going to show you on this sheet was just the cohort impact calculator. So this is the last blue one. This is a sheet that those of you who are delivering for groups of residents or groups of clients over several years might want to use. So if, say, for example, that you're dealing with 100 people over 5 years, what this sheet can help you do is understand how the impact of the activity will take place over those 5 years. So 100 people over 5 years, you spread those out in this cell here. You can see column B, so 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. So I've split my 100 people, 20 people every year for the next 5 years, and then I can understand, well, how many of those 20% of people I'm working with each year will achieve the outcome I'm interested in, so will improve their health, for instance. And if I think that there's going to be some time delay between me starting my RPlace work and people achieving it, I might say, well, only 50% in year 2, perhaps 90% of clients in year 3 will be improved to health, 95 in year 3, but then it might tail off a bit, so 90%, 85% as people forget the support they've received, forget the advice they've been given. This cohort impact calculator, you'll see at the bottom, it just gives you an aggregated impact for your scheme over time. So it works out, because you're only working with 20% in year 1, the maximum impact your scheme can have is 10%. If you do use this this part of the model, and not all of you will, because I think some of you will be just working with one single cohort in 1 year, for instance. But if you do use this sheet, then once you've got these figures along the bottom here, so I'm just highlighting them, then all you need to do is flick back to the benefits sheet and enter them into this section here, so columns AE to AI, where you enter in how much effect you're going to have in various years. That's a slightly more advanced bit of the modelling, so don't worry if you don't end up using that. Lots of areas don't use that section of the model. Okay, I'm just going to flick back now and give you the chance, because I realise I've run through a bit there, but the chance to ask any questions you might have so far. So, Jim, could you just see if any questions have been posed?
Yeah, thank you, David. At the moment, there are no questions. However,
Okay.
I'll see if any come through in the next minute or so. But what I will just update participants with is, as I say, later on in the session, there will be an opportunity for you to sort of verbally update on how you're progressing with your CBA and the challenges. But also, I will be interested to know your opinion as to what intervention in January and again in February to support you with your CBA you'd find most beneficial. I mean, we have 2 or 3 options. One is that we run another webinar in January. Another is we run a sort of face-to-face sort of workshop scenario where you travel in to meet with David and colleagues. Or the third option is that we actually give you or feedback on an individual basis about feedback on your draft CBA. So that would require you to submit what you've done to date, and for David and colleagues to feedback to you either over the telephone or in a sort of webinar scenario, and give you more detailed feedback on your individual CBA. So at the moment we're fairly open to how we support you going forward. I do think that the opportunity to maybe provide some one-to-one feedback and discussion may be my preferred option at the moment, but we would be interested to getting your opinion when we open up the mic later on in the session. Just one question, David, is
Yep.
how do you know the dead weight percentage from Ellie?
Okay. The dead weight, the concept of dead weight. Some people find this tricky. So just to recap, then it's trying to understand what would have happened anyway if your R-place activity hadn't been taking place on the ground. There are various ways to estimate that percentage. I mean, obviously you'll never be able to get a completely accurate figure because it's thinking about an alternative universe, if you like. One way is to look at trend data. So if you're looking at outcomes where there is historic trend data that will be collected by the local council or the local public health team, for instance, you might look at what has been the trend in that outcome that we're interested in over the last few years. So what has been the trend, for instance, in GP visits or unnecessary A&E attendances? And then you might look at the trend figure within your R-place activity, and you could say, well, the difference between those gives me an idea of, how many A&E visits or GP appointments we might have had when actually we've had this number. So that shows you that the net impact we've had, the percentage difference. Alternatively, you can look at data in other similar areas. So I know quite a lot of our place areas are sort of taking a neighbourhood or a ward-based footprint. So you might look at the outcome statistics for your neighbourhood or ward and say, these are our public health metrics in a similar area, not too far away. The figures are these, and again you can say, well, the percentage difference that gives us an idea of what would have happened in our area if we hadn't intervened. That control area or comparator area approach, as it's sometimes known, you just have to be careful that you're choosing an area that is broadly similar to yours in terms of demographics, size, economy, and so on. You can use things such as the Index of Multiple Deprivation, which is an Office of National Statistics approach to categorising small areas of the country, and you can find areas that are similar to you. A third approach, Ellie, to identifying dead weight is simply to ask your beneficiaries directly. So saying to them, we've supported you in these ways over the last 3, 6, 12 months, however long it is, and you've achieved these kind of outcomes. do you think you would have achieved that anyway? And identifying what percentage of people say, actually, yes, I think I would have achieved this. You know, I was on the road to this improvement, but and others might say, no, I wouldn't have got anywhere near this outcome if, you know, VR Play support hadn't been there. So various options really in terms of identifying dead weight. Hopefully that gives you some ideas to be getting on with. Okay, there's just one more question that's come in that I'll just have a look at now. So it's from KNM, and it's, so could you please confirm, so is the level of engagement in the benefit sheet calculated by looking at the affected population's proportion to the target population? Okay, can I suggest, KNM, we'll pick that up when we do the walkthrough of the real life example I'm going to show you in a second. I won't ignore that question. I'll just illustrate it by referring directly to the evidence in that worksheet. Okay, Jim, if that's all right with you, shall I flick back to the walkthrough example? Great, so I'll just do that now. 1 second. Okay, everybody. So you should now see on the screen another version of the Excel tool, but this one actually has data in it. I should stress that when we were preparing these real-life examples, we did alter some of the data in them for confidentiality reasons, because obviously local authorities submitted these and we didn't want to give 100% depictions of their costs and their resourcing issues and stuff like that. But broadly, it's taken from a recent submission to DCLG for the Transformation Challenge Award. The proposition summary page here, so the local authority has entered information about their proposal here, and I'll just explain their concept to you. So this is a city council in England, and they are faced, like many areas, with a lot of pressure on health and social care services, and they've identified that pressure is going to manifest in terms of excessive numbers of GP appointments, people turning up to A&E, people being admitted to hospital when really it could be avoided with some proactive intervention earlier. So what the City Council has done in partnership with their local university and their clinical commissioning groups, so their GPs, is to develop a concept of having what they call sort and support workers. So these are locally employed people who are given a caseload of the most vulnerable older people within parts of the city, and they work with those individuals to help maintain their independence, to ensure that they're managing their health well, and thereby living independently for longer, leading to less demand on health and social care services. The model also involves the appointment of a smaller number of what they call life navigators. Sounds a bit like a Star Wars cast member, but they work with smaller groups of residents who have more complex needs, so more intensive support. So the sort and support workers might have, you know, sort of weekly or fortnightly contact with an individual, whereas life navigators, it's a more intensive approach. So that's a description of what they modelled. They're going to be starting their work next year, and they model for 5 years, so it's similar to what many of you are probably considering. And I just also wanted to highlight the fact that when they undertook this modelling, they shared it with us at various stages, but the City Council, they regularly completed the comments, caveats and next steps boxes, which is really good practice, because, for instance, you know, if somebody else from a City Council picks up this modelling, they can quickly understand how calculations relating to social care have been made. They can see that there's, for instance, in the next steps, this had, you know, timelines for developing it further and so on. We encourage all areas, you know, really use these boxes so that completing this can be a joint effort. It means you'll be able to pass it on to colleagues, pass it on to people in other agencies, and they can take your modelling forwards. If you just leave this blank and it's all in your head about what modelling you've done, then it means that you're just creating more work for yourself in future because no one else can understand what you've done. So that's their proposition, and I'm just going to talk you through how they modelled it. In terms of the agencies involved in this proposal, so the key partners were at the top here. So the City Council, as I've mentioned, and their local clinical commissioning group. Because they were looking at a health advice initiative, there was no need to involve criminal justice agencies. So police, probation, courts, prisons, other criminal justice services, they're all turned off in the model. They're turned to no here in this box. Likewise, they weren't interested in supporting people to get into work because they were dealing with an older population who are retired. This wasn't about getting people off job seeker allowance or into other forms of employment. So they've turned DWP, HMRC off. Likewise, not interested in schools outcomes, not interested in housing outcomes. They did also join in partnership, as I mentioned, with the university, with their local voluntary sector, with their local hospital trust, and then they also got core funding for their activity from DCLG through Transformation Challenge Award and the Better Care Fund, which is a Department of Health initiative, a bit similar to the Transformation Challenge Award, to help areas improve their social care provision. So all those agencies were going to be involved in the costs of running this pilot, so they were all turned to yes in this drop-down list here. So these are the partners that are involved in the City Council's proposals. In terms of the benefits of what they've done, so I've just flicked over now to the benefit sheet. First thing you'll notice is that this sheet is a lot smaller than the benefit sheet when you open it up for the first time. So what the City Council have done is that they've discounted all those outcomes that they're not interested in. So all those around school truancy, for instance, or getting someone to a job. They've turned those to no in column C, and then they've clicked the macro button saying hide unused rows, and that's just removed those rows from the modelling. So it's just an easier sheet to use as a result. In terms of the outcomes that are left, we can see that they've got two of the core outcomes which the model starts with, so they're the green boxes here. So they're interested in reducing unnecessary A&E attendances and reducing hospital admissions as well from this group they're working with. So both those are left on. They also, as a partnership, said there are some wider outcomes that we're interested in which aren't default in New Economy's model. So they went away and determined those. The first was reducing the number of unnecessary GP appointments. Secondly, they wanted to reduce the number of people entering formal social care. And thirdly, they wanted to, sorry, I've just scrolled down too far, there we go, of those who did enter social care, they wanted to reduce the cost of the package of support they have to offer to those individuals. So the idea being that if someone has better managed their health in the community, in their home, by the time they do eventually enter social care, it should be less costly to look after them. So they identified those three additional outcomes that they're interested in. They turned those to yes, and then using our unit cost database, which is a separate Excel spreadsheet, which has got a lot more outcomes listed in it. It's got about 500 or so. They sort out these three additional outcomes, and they found out how much a reduction in a GP appointment or a reduction in one person entering social care was worth. And if I just scroll to the right here, you'll see that in the column titled Unit Fiscal Benefit, they've just entered in those values. So reducing one unnecessary GP appointment is quite a small saving, £37, but reducing a social care entry is a big saving, nearly £3,800 for instance. So they've entered those figures in so that once they start putting these numbers into the rest of the model, those figures multiply through. So they've set up their spreadsheet then, and they have the outcomes, the 5 outcomes they're interested in listed. It was then quite a simple process really. Firstly, they identified what their target population is. So they said, well, we're going to be working in half of the city, and we know from our evidence that there are 500 older people within that part of the city who are vulnerable to entering social care or being admitted to hospital unnecessarily. So they had their target population of 500, same across all the outcomes. The next step then was saying, and of that 500, how many will be affected by the outcome we're interested in, or how many potential incidents might that group of 500 individuals create. So to take the example here of A&E attendance, so they approached the hospital trust, who are one of their partners, and they said, could you give us an idea, this cohort of 500 individuals, you know, they have these characteristics in terms of their age and where they live, for instance. Using historic data, can you predict how many A&E attendances we might have from that group over the next year? So the hospital trust have looked at that and they said, well, we predict it will be about 1,400 A&E attendances. That's not saying that every one of those 500 individuals will attend A&E about 3 times. Some of them might attend 7 or 8 times, others maybe only once in the course of a year. But generally from that group, they're forecasting there could be up to 1,400 A&E attendances. Scrolling down, looking at some of the other outcomes, so hospital admissions. So again, going on the principle that lots of this group of 500 were in and out of hospital for relatively short periods, what's sometimes referred to as bed blocking, for instance. The local data suggested that this group were coming into hospital on a very frequent basis, often following on from an A&E admission. They'd then be admitted to hospital for a few nights, then go out again. Generally, it was creating a lot of hospital admissions that could be avoided. Scrolling down further, they also had the CCG as in their partnership, and they talked to the CCG about, from this group of 500, roughly how many GP appointments will we see in a year, and the average figure of 10 appointments per individual. So again, almost once a month in many cases, if not more for some individuals. So 5,000 potential GP appointments. And then finally at the bottom here, social care admissions. So this was one obviously where the City Council had the information at their fingertips, and they could look at that and say, well, of that 500, we'd expect about 200 of them to enter our social care system, require support from us in an average year. So that was, again, looking back over historic trend data for admissions from individuals of that kind of age, from those kind of backgrounds. So they've worked out the potential number of incidents or the affected population for each of their outcomes. And the important thing here is that they've interrogated local data. So I would encourage all our place areas to think about the outcome that you're interested in, work out who has that data. So where do I need to go to get data on A&E attendance? Where do I need to go to get data on number of GP appointments that might come from this group? And to seek out that data and to look at how that data might have changed over time, because that gives you a stronger basis for working out the potential number of incidents than just obviously starting from a guess. Moving to the right then, the next thing that you'll need to do in your model is this is where you start entering percentages. And again, looking at level of engagement. So I'll come back now to the question that was posed just about 5 minutes ago. So what the group here have said is, what percentage of the population will we be able to work with? So the question was, does this level of engagement represent the target population or the affected population? And the answer is, it can relate to either. Sorry, that's not the clearest answer. I'll explain that in a bit more detail. If in this affected population, what you're reporting is numbers of individuals, so for instance, column cell H45 here or H46, so that's saying there's 200 individuals who will enter social care, then in terms of engagement, what you're asking is, how many of those 200 individuals will we be able to support? So will the sort and support workers who are central to this model, will they be able to engage with all 200? And the City Council looked at workloads, they looked at evidence about individuals engaging with support being offered to them, outreach, and they said, we think we'll be able to reach about 190 of those individuals. So our 14 members of staff, whatever it is, given their caseloads, they can work with about 95%. Further up here, they said, and what about in these columns here for things like A&E attendance? So these are a number of incidents. So you can't say that we're going to engage with every incident. You say we're going to engage with people. So go back to 2 columns and say, okay, so the target population that we'll be working with is 500. And again, the group said, well, the life navigators can pick up those who might go into social care, so they can pick up the 200 most in need. And the sort and support workers, we think they'll be able to, again, pick up about 95% of the 500 people that we're targeting every year. So level of engagement, that's relating to the engagement with the target population, the number of people, not the number of incidents. So how many of those people are you going to be able to engage with, hopefully, to change their behaviour? I hope that's a bit clearer. Moving on to the right, so some of your R-Place areas, you'll be working with individuals over a length of time, and there's a chance that some of them will disengage from the support you're offering. It may be that they choose not to attend follow-up support sessions. It may be that they have chaotic lifestyles and they just forget. It may be for various reasons, because we're not compelling people to take up the support that's on offer to them. So in this Transformation Challenge Award example, the City Council said, well, we've got about 90% of these older people that are sort and support and life navigators are engaging with. We think that they're going to remain engaged with us. They did have some evidence, it's noted down here in their workings column. They had some evidence from a pilot that had been run not actually within the city, but nearby, which operated a similar model of sort of sort and support workers and life navigators. They termed them something slightly different, but it was quite similar. And in that pilot, they found that 9 out of 10 individuals had continued to engage with the health outreach service. So that the City Council assumed, well, we think we're going to achieve a similar level of retention. 9 out of 10 people that we have the capacity to engage with will stay involved with our project for as long as necessary. So 90% was their retention rate down here. Just the final few things then on this worksheet. Firstly, we need to look at the impact rate that the City Council think that their intervention is going to achieve. So if I just pick out the top one here. So this was around A&E attendances. So just scroll back, there we go, A&E attendance. And the team sat down and discussed this, and I've mentioned they did have a little bit of pilot information to go on, but not a massive amount. So they said, well, we think that, through the quality of support that we're offering, because it's going to be designed to best practice principles, we think that in 70% of cases, people are going to be less likely to visit A&E because they will have received support within the home. They'll have more confidence at managing their own health. So we think in 70% of potential A&E attendances, we can divert those people away from A&E. So it's based on a little bit of pilot evidence, but really it was more an assumption because they're at the outset of their work, and they committed themselves, and they have committed themselves to tracking that over time, to seeing how many of those potentially 1,400 A&E attendances, how many that they can avoid through their work. So 70% A&E reduction. For some of the other health outcomes around hospital admission and GP appointments, interesting, their modelling was slightly more pessimistic. So take this example of GP appointments. The team, again, looking at their pilot evidence, but also from discussions and their understanding of what their clients do, just their professional expertise, they knew that it's far harder to prevent people from turning up at their GP on a Monday morning or whatever morning than it is to stop someone turning up at A&E. They know that it's more of a natural reaction just to go to your GP So they thought that it would take more work and they'd be less successful at diverting people away from GP appointments. So here the impact percentage is only 30% compared to 70% reduction in A&E attendances. Just finally on impact percentages, in terms of the entry into social care, so as I mentioned at the start, this smaller group of 200 people with especially complex needs and being at risk of going into social care within the year, they were going to receive support, really dedicated support from the Life Navigator staff, the 4 or 5 members there. And the team who were doing the modelling assumed, well, there aren't any Life Navigators in place at the moment. Those individuals would just be receiving standard reactive health and social care support, so they'd have to flag they have an issue, and then they'd probably attend their GP or whatever and then get referred into social services. So this new scheme that we're proposing with Life Navigators is over and above any existing work, and they assume therefore that it would have a really big impact upon the support available to those individuals. So they assume that in 100% of cases they would be successful in helping to divert that person away from social care and keep them living independently. That was one of the figures they put into this model that I questioned a bit when I was reviewing it. I said, you know, really, are you going to, in 100% of cases, avoid someone going into social care? I think in their final version of the model they might have tweaked that number down a bit when they submitted it to GCLG, but generally they were saying they were quite bullish about how effective they were going to be. Just finally then, in terms of the data they entered, they needed to consider dead weight. So what would have happened without the presence of the sort and support workers and the Life Navigators. I mentioned in answering Ellie's question earlier on that there are various ways of estimating dead weight. You can look at trend data, you can ask individuals directly what they might have achieved, you can look at data for a similar neighbourhood or a similar area. The City Council in this case, they didn't do any of that. They just used what we term expert judgment, which really is just saying we think this is going to be what dead weight is for this programme. Wasn't quite as much a guess as that might suggest. They did make the point that the staff they were going to be recruiting for this scheme were over and above any existing staff. So these individuals that they're supporting, the 500 individuals and the 200 with serious needs, they were going to be getting no support at present, well, no proactive support at present. So by having these 18 or so staff recruited, they'd be offering them a net additional service. There'd be like to be very little dead weight within that group of 500 because at present they have no similar support. So dead weight percentage, the team assumed a pretty low rate of dead weight amongst the group. The one area where they assumed dead weight might be a little bit higher was in terms of reducing GP visits. This was because they'd acknowledged that people are a larger number of people are more likely to go to their GP as a matter of course. That obviously means that there's also a potentially larger group of people who won't go to their GP as a matter of course, who will change their behaviour. So they assumed there that their dead weight figure was slightly higher at 15%, but still quite low. In your modelling, you know, if your dead weight's near 0%, what you're basically saying is our work is novel, it's new, it builds on you know, services and delivers something fundamentally new to people. Whereas if you have a high dead weight, it's suggesting that, you know, we're just tinkering around the edges in terms of the support we're offering. Okay, so that was the core of their model entered. Key points to recap really. In this modelling here, they've used local data wherever possible. So they've interrogated the City Council systems, they've interrogated the clinical commissioning group's data and the hospital trust data. They've also looked for pilot evidence from elsewhere, and they found a little bit of pilot evidence which they used. But third point to raise, they've not been scared to use their expert judgment and make guesses. So the dead weight column, for instance, they didn't have time or they didn't have the data to do a really robust assessment of dead weight. So they've just used their gut feel of saying that not many of the individuals we were working with would receive support in any other way. So those are 3 key points I think I get across from how the City Council completed this sheet. Just scrolling to the right, once you've got all those things in, the model will start producing numbers for you. 2 sort of tweaks you can do to in the production of those numbers. Some of you may have come across the concept of optimism bias. That is the idea that if we're using weak data to do cost-benefit analysis, then we need to acknowledge that by reducing the value of benefits expected or increasing the costs that we think we're going to be spending on this project, because costs generally overrun, benefits generally undershoot. So what the City Council did here was they looked at their data, how old it was, what its source was, and then they referred to these green tabs here I've just flicked over. So that's the optimism bias matrix for benefits. This is the optimism bias matrix for costs. And they said, we think generally the quality of our data is level 3 or level 1 or level 5. You know, so if, for instance, they were using quite old data, or it was uncorroborated expert judgment, i.e. they guessed it, then they'd say, well, that's a level 6 piece of data. So in their worksheet, they'd colour code it red, or if it was stronger, they might colour code it yellow, and filter down their total benefits by the corresponding percentage. So these percentages listed down here, correction factors. So once you've got all the data in, then have a think about how confident you are in your data, and if necessary, apply an optimism bias correction. Just final thing that they did was in terms of profiling their benefits over the 5 years that they're interested in. So I mentioned to you when I was doing the blank walkthrough that you've got the cohort impact calculator. This City Council, they didn't actually use this cohort impact calculator. They just went on the assumption that, well, we're going to be working with 500 people each year, and they said in year 1 of working with that group, how many people would achieve each of the outcomes we're interested in, so each of the 5 outcomes. And for some of the outcomes, like this one, reducing A&E attendance, they said, well, we think a majority, 80% of those 500 people will be able to divert them away from A&E attendance, change their behaviour from presenting at A&E pretty quickly. So in year 1, and then by year 3, 95% of them will be using their sort and support workers and using community-based support. And then that outcome might tail off a bit as people forget the advice they've been given and so on. For some of the other outcomes, for instance, here we've got one around GP appointments and hospital admissions. They thought that impact might be slightly lower. So they're saying, well, it's harder to prevent hospital admissions in year 1. It takes some time for this new system to bed down, and for the advice it's given to be taken on board by people and to act upon. So when you're doing your modelling, once you've got all the data in the left-hand side here, then just have a discussion amongst your group and say, of these X number of people that we're working with, how many are actually going to achieve that outcome that we're interested in year 1? And just acknowledge that in real life, people don't get into a job on the first day that they receive skills and training from their local college. It might take them 12 months, it might take them 18 months to get to that end outcome that we desire. So think about your outcomes, how quickly they might come on stream, and also how quickly they might fade away once your R-Place activity is scaled back or you're no longer around, and just try and reflect that in this profiling here on the right-hand side. Okay, that's all I want to cover off on the benefits tab. I'm just checking there's nothing on those questions. Okay, we'll pick up those. I see some questions have been posed, so I'll pick those up at the end of this section. Just move over now and look at the cost sheet. Just take a sip of water, excuse me 1 second. Okay, so the cost sheet for this proposal for the sort and support and the Life Navigator workers. This was quite a straightforward transformation challenge award proposal to cost up, because all the activity they were proposing was additional to what's currently taking place. So they weren't planning to merge any existing teams. They weren't planning to close down any existing community centres. It was all about recruiting 18 new staff, training them up, and advertising the fact that this new service was available to elderly individuals. So the City Council have just listed down here on the left-hand side the core costs that they're going to take on board as a result of this work. So firstly, there was the Transformation Challenge Award bid itself that they're making to DCLG. So they're asking for about £1 million in terms of team setup costs and systems. And that cost was, so who pays DCLG, and it was all in year one. So it was the initial upfront grant that they're asking for. Once that grant had been spent, then they'd have 18 members of staff in place, and those staff are categorised and costed in these two rows here, rows 6 and 7. So the support and support workers, so the City Council team, they worked out that the salaries and on-costs for those 14 staff will come to, what, 580,000 in total every year. So if they enter that figure, the funding for that was going to come from the Department of Health's Better Care Fund, so they assigned the cost there. And what they've done, you'll see here in profiling those costs, if they said, well, in year 2, the salary and on-costs are going to be 580,000, but then there'll be an agreement in the contract of those staff for an annual salary uplift of 1.5%, 2%, whatever it is. So you can see here in the cost percentages, they've just, for years 3, 4, and 5, increased that each year by 2%, just to pick up the salary cost increases that are put into people's contracts. Likewise, in terms of the Life Navigators, so just 4 staff there, so a cheaper cost in total, £186,000. Again, just assuming that those salary and on-costs will increase slightly over the years due to wage increases. They then, so that was the core staffing cost. They then identified that there'd be various other activities relating to their pilot, to their project, that they needed to cost up. So there was recruitment costs around getting the 18 staff. So they said, well, we need to place a few adverts and so on, so £10,000 for that. Again, all to be spent in year 1, getting the team in place. They said, well, the City Council has a commissioning team, and they're still going to have to work with the Sort and Support and the Life Navigator staff on a fairly regular basis. So we'll assume that about £60,000 worth of commissioning staff time will be needed each year. Again, uprate that over the years to reflect wage increases. So that would be core central service staff just supporting the decisions of the navigators, for instance. They said, well, we're going to commission an evaluation from the university, so that's going to cost some money, and we're going to do that in year 2. So they profiled that here. They said that in year 1 we'll need to communicate and print out materials about this new service so people know what's available to them. So they put in some dissemination communication costs. And then finally they said, 2 final entries, they said we're going to have to refurbish 2 venues within this part of the city. We're going to need to do that so that the 18 staff have specialist facilities at which they can meet some of the residents in case residents can't be supported within their home. So they said, well, we need to refurbish those 2 venues, which is going to cost £100,000 in total. Mainly that will be in year 1, but they also acknowledge that there'll be some ongoing maintenance costs for those 2 venues. So in their costings here, they've just put 5% of their community asset costs in terms of maintenance going forwards. And then finally they said the Sort and Support and Life Navigator staff, one of their key activities will be developing what are termed wellness plans. So these are the advice packs, if you like, to the 500 individuals about how they can manage their health, how they can live independently. In some cases that will require referrals onto specialist services like adaptations in the home so that people don't slip and trip. And the City Council estimated that would represent a cost of about £50,000 in the first year in terms of developing those plans. So that's their costs for the total scheme. So you scroll down, you can see, so what they're saying is that the cost of the program in total will be about 2.2 million. That will, however, be spread over various years. So some of that cost will be spread out into years 2 to 5. Some of it will be incurred up front, and the model works that out for you. So they've got their total costs in, and they've got from the previous sheet a completed benefit sheet. In terms of the outputs that produced for the City Council, I'm just going to flick over now to the orange tabs at the bottom here, which present the outputs from the CBA modelling. So the first tab that you'll be interested in is this one called Output Metrics, and this presents in tabulated format a summary of your costs and benefits sheet. Up here, this yellow box, so this reports the fiscal benefits, the fiscal savings from what the City Council was proposing. You'll see that in this part of the table here, just this part of the table here, the model has profiled out the total cost of the scheme over the 5 years. So you can see that there's a lump sum investment in year 1, so getting the 2 facilities ready, for instance, and then over future years there's ongoing costs in terms of staff salaries and maintenance. When you discount those 5 years of cost back, it means that the approximate total cost of the scheme will be about £4.65, £4.66 million over 5 years. So that's what the model is telling you it will cost to deliver this scheme. In terms of the value of the benefits, the fiscal value of the benefits, the model is telling you that it feels that over 5 years this scheme will deliver £7.6 million of fiscal benefits. So the benefits exceed the costs by about £3 million. So that's obviously a good thing. And in this cell here, AB13, you can see that it's saying the impact on your budget or the budgets of all the partners is going to be nearly a £3 million saving. If you have a negative figure in there, don't panic. What that means is you're actually saving money, so your benefits outweigh your costs. And given that you're saving money, that means that your benefit cost ratio, or your financial return on investment as it's termed here, is 1.64. So for every pound that is spent, £1.64 is delivered in terms of fiscal savings. That also means that this project, as it's currently set up, will deliver a very quick payback. So despite those initial investments to get the community centres ready and to start recruiting staff, the model reckons that somewhere between year 1 and year 2, so early 2016 perhaps, you will have actually recovered that money, because fewer people will be attending A&E, fewer people will be going into social care, because the life navigators, support staff will be on the ground doing their job, for instance. So a quick payback period is predicted by the model, which is obviously a good thing for the City Council when they put in their bid to DCLG for funding. Also on this table, on this page, you've got the economic case box here. So this picks up all the non-fiscal but public value benefits. If I just scroll back, I'll show you what I mean by that. So in the benefits sheet here, the fiscal benefit is standalone. It's just in this column here. For some of the outcomes in our model, not for any of these 5 unfortunately, but for some of them, these 2 columns here which talk about economic and social value, those will have figures in. If those have figures in, then in this output metrics tab will be totaled up in addition to the fiscal benefits. So the total benefits figure would be in excess of 7.6 million, for instance. And it will tell you that your public value return on investment is greater than your fiscal. So for any of you who are looking at outcomes where there's both a fiscal and a public value component, you should see these 2 tables are different. In this example, they're the same because there are no public value benefits identified. Just finally on this page, some of you may have seen this purple table at the bottom. This is just the opportunity you have for looking at the return on investment to individual agencies. So in this example, for instance, the City Council, the model is telling us that they will be spending a relatively small amount of money, about £240,000, and they'll be seeing quite a big return on that investment, nearly 2.7 million. So a very big return on their investment, £11 for every pound they spent, and a quick payback. However, for other partners, so if we go to the CCG, for instance, so they're benefiting as well, but no investment. See if I can find another example. If I look at, so the Better Care Fund, for instance, because this is largely a grant-funded scheme, all the costs are being borne by the Better Care Fund grant, 3.4 million. All the benefits are flowing through to the hospital trust, to the local authority, for instance. For some of the more complex CBA modelling, we see this table's useful because lots of agencies are investing and lots are saving. For some of the more simple cases, a bit like this one, this table can be a bit redundant because it just shows you that some people are spending and some are saving. Just a few other things before we finish up on this one. The pie charts. So if you've entered information correctly into your cost sheet and you've assigned the cost to different agencies, different funders, this pie chart should populate automatically for you. We can see here the example I gave. So this scheme is 95% grant funded, so 20% from the DCLG's Transformation Challenge Award, 75% from the Better Care Fund that the Department of Health runs. It's only a 5% contribution actually from the City Council. In terms of benefits, we can see that it's the local GP commissioning groups and the local authority are going to see key benefits here because they're going to be seeing fewer people attending GP appointments, fewer people going into social care, so considerable savings for them. And the column charts, just finally, so as I say, in more complex versions, you should see lots more columns, but this one is just showing the blue columns who's spending money on this scheme, the yellow who's saving. And what we do in Greater Manchester is we try and use these kind of charts and those pie charts to instigate discussion about joint investment in schemes, saying, you know, if lots of agencies are benefiting from this, then surely lots of agencies should be investing in it and not just expecting one organisation to always pick up the tab. Okay, so hopefully that walkthrough has given you a bit more confidence about the types of data that you need to enter into the different sheets, and also made you realise the sheets perhaps aren't as scary as they look when they're blank, and there seems to be lots of potential data to enter. I'm going to now switch back to the slides. So we've done that example there, and we are now going to move on to the opportunity for each of you are participating in the webinar just to give us an update on how your CBA is progressing and what challenges you might face. So Jim, is it right if I hand back to you to manage this process of unmuting people?
Okay. We tried this the other day for the first time, and it worked. It goes a little bit like the Eurovision Song Contest when you're sort of phoning into Stockholm, etc. So I'll try each of you in turn. It may not work with all of you because it depends on your mic and whether you've phoned in, etc. But we'll give it a go. I'll work from top to bottom. Seems the fairest way. So Canem, I hope I've pronounced your name right. I'll start with you, so I'll unmute you. Hello, I can't unmute Canem. I think that's because you haven't got a mic, Canem. You've phoned in. So I'll try with Chris. Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
I can, Jim. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Good.
Hi, Chris.
Hi there. We're very early days. I'm going to be supporting King Standing Regeneration Trust with their CBA, so I'm just trying to catch up a bit more on how this tool works. It's been really useful. Thank you.
Okay. Chris, what are King Standing, what's their Our Place focused on?
It's on health. They're working from the local leisure centre, so they have good community engagement opportunities for people who just come in to the centre itself, and they're going to be doing a lot of stuff in the kind of post-Christmas period, which is when such issues often come to mind, and then using that as sort of launch pad almost for interventions in other areas of people's lives, really around behaviour change, et cetera, et cetera.
So sort of using people coming into the leisure centre as the contact point, and then being able to proactively support them in their homes after they've not left the leisure centre of their own, but once they've made that contact and so on.
Yeah, they've also managed to raise money for a worker to help support this as well. So they've already got some benefits coming in with regard to and working with local GPs, and also working with a neighbouring area that's not very far away. So there's some good opportunity here for doing some comparators and learning from each other.
Okay, that sounds encouraging in terms of identifying the comparator approach as well. I think one of the advantages VR Place areas have got is that because you're working on quite a small scale, there are lots of potential comparator areas you can go to. The flip side of that is it can be a little bit tricky to get low-level data. So to understand, neighbourhoods, communities, how much demand they put on services. That's really a case of speaking to your local health trust or your local council and understanding if they can provide ward-level data and things like that.
Yeah, and there's good relationships with regard to that, and the other aspect of this is really it's trying to get to the 80% that use up 20% of the 20% that use up 80% of the time of GPs, etc. And that's where the biggest savings can obviously be made with regard to trying to find alternative interventions around that.
Okay.
The other thing, the other thing I was going to say, I knew something was in my head. The other difficult one on this one is when you're talking about health, it's obviously a long-term impact, and therefore it's not like crime, antisocial behaviour. So that's one of the more tricky ones I think that was coming through to me with regard to how you anticipate that behaviour change, and even some of the dead weight. The period in which who would obviously be would do stuff anyway, and also then those that might drop away because of the long-term time that's needed to see behaviour change around health issues.
Yeah. As I said in the example, trying to pick that up in the benefits box. So if I just scroll across now, in the profiling section here, which is this percentage impact here, some people often find it easier to understand what these columns are about if you read them as profile year 1, profile year 2, and just say for some of those health outcomes. It probably will take a long time in terms of lifestyle changes before someone achieves that outcome that we're interested in. But then that lifestyle change achieved, then it should sustain for quite a while as well. So you might want to look, well, if you model over 10 years, what does that do in terms of our return on investment? If the community has healthier lifestyles for the next decade, it might take a while to start, but the longer term benefits are considerable.
No, that's great. And the other thing, just to say, the example was particularly helpful because that also acts as a catalyst to kind of what you can put in there, and that'll be useful to get through really, because it may not be directly relevant, but actually it might trigger the mind to think, well, actually that's also important, and we can put that in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers, Chris. I'm going to try with Canem again. She may now be mic'd up, so bear with me. Canem, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello there.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, I can. Hi, now I can talk.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I don't have much to add. This is incredibly helpful. I just wanted to thank you for going through a real life example, and also being incredibly kind with emails. That's really all I have to say.
Yeah, Canon, we've talked a bit on the emails, haven't we? And I'm pretty confident that you know what you're doing. From the questions you're posing me, it's clear that you understand the basics of a model, and I just think the more you use it, the more you get your head around it. Hopefully, having this shared example as well, we'll take that further. So, yep.
Thanks.
I'm
It's great to hear you think that I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But thank you again. You've been incredibly generous with your time. It's been incredibly helpful.
No problem.
Okay. There was one question, Canem, that you
yeah, I asked about the offset costs. In this example, most of them were left blank, I'm just wondering if you were to make up one for this particular example, what would they be?
So was it around offset costs? So I'm just opening up
Yeah.
my question pane again. Yep. So let's go back in and have a think. So offset costs here, sorry, I'm in the blank version. I need to go into the proper version. There we go, I'm in the proper version now. I suppose you might say there would be some offset of core staff time. What I mean by that is if we've got these sort and support workers in place and the life navigators, so 18 staff picking up 500 people with particular health and social care needs, you'd assume that those 500 people weren't turning up in other parts of the public sector or putting pressure on other bits of the city council's services or the CCG services. So here, when I've talked about commissioning staff time, for instance, it might be possible to put in a slight saving in terms of other commissioning staff time, not having to engage with that group and offer them services because the life navigator's already done that kind of work. Also, you might pick up, I suppose, a bit around, I'm trying to think if, you might pick up as well in terms of the setting up new systems, refurbishing venues and so on, if that did mean that there would be the opportunity to close another venue or to reduce the usage of another venue and save money that way. It's a tricky one because the question areas often put to us when they're modelling is, well, you know, where do you draw the line? You know, by this sort and support worker going in, they could prevent that person from having, you know, numerous different outcomes, and do I need to work out the avoided costs of all of those? And we sort of say, no, just think about the core outcomes that you're interested in this case, you know, GP appointments, A&E attendances, social care admissions, and think about, you know, are there any obvious costs in those areas that would be avoided thanks to this new system being in place. It's one of those, I think, where as a group, as an R-Place group, so what I mean is you need to sort of have two discussions almost like, okay, what is the cost of what we're proposing to do, you know, how we're going to support people, and then almost say, and imagine we weren't here, what we'll be spending on these individuals, you know, let's try and understand, you know, what they currently access and so on like that, and that's the best way really to identify offset costs.
Great. May I also ask if it'd be possible to share the CBA worksheet that you're working on right now, the example one?
Yes, it will be sent round by Jim after the session, along with the blank one and the webinar slides. Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Canem. Finally, it's opportunity for Lauren. Hi, Lauren. Can you hear me? Hello. Are you there, Lauren? No, it all seems deathly quiet.
Are you able to try Flora?
Yeah, Flora is listening in from the DCLG.
Right, apologies. Yeah.
So,
yes, I see, yeah.
But what Flora has sent me through is a link to a report that's been released by Sheffield Hallam on the evaluation of Rotherham's social prescribing pilot model, which may be of interest to you. So what I'll do at the end of the session during today, I'll forward you through the slides as we've made reference to, but I'll also send you the link to the to this report that hopefully you'll find of some value. Okay, I'll try Lauren one more time. Hello, Lauren. Can you hear us? No.
Oh, hang on, it says talking, Lauren. But I can't hear anything. Lauren, if you can hear me, obviously you're just based down the road from us. If you drop me or Julian Cox an email if you have any questions about the CBA modelling. Obviously we work with Stockport on a pretty regular basis, and Steve Skelton, I know, has asked if we can be involved in some capacity with the Our Place work, I think locally anyway. So my email address is in the webinar slides. You might have my colleague Julian Cox's email address as well, so please feel free to get in touch with us directly if you need to.
Okay, thank you. Well,
Jim?
I think that ends the questions. I've got no further questions that have been forwarded. So
Okay.
I think we're just moving on to our... what I can now go on to is just to update you again about what support we can potentially offer you going forward. As I mentioned at the outset of the presentation, we are looking to deliver 2 more interventions across all of the areas doing CBA, again based on themes. So as we said earlier, the 7 of you who are working on health and or sort of health promotion as a theme. In January, I'm not quite sure how it's going to pan out yet, and it would be useful to get your feedback. So if you can email me any time during this week, just to give me a feel for what intervention you would find most beneficial towards the closing stages now of the programme. I'd say we are planning one in January and again in February. Speaking to the DCLG yesterday, they were quite keen for the intervention to be to potentially be on a sort of one-to-one basis, because we're very conscious that we've delivered you sessions such as today where we've talked you through the new economy model, advised how to complete it, answered questions, etc. But as yet we haven't really gone into your individual CBAs, and I think the DCLG are quite keen to do that early in the new year. So I'd be interested to get your feedback as to how you want us to shape that. But what we're looking at the moment is possibly giving you an opportunity to submit your draft CBA, or exactly where you are at the moment with your CBA, early in the new year, and for colleagues, David and colleagues at New Economy, to give you a steer and some feedback on a sort of individual proposal level. So that's where we are at the moment. I say there will be intervention in January and February, and we're open to suggestions as how best to do that. What will happen is I'll need to, through your feedback and consultation with DCLG and David, I will need to come up with a plan early in sort of first week in January, so we can schedule it into people's diaries. So I say there is support going forward, and it's a case of watch this space. I'm just checking now if there's any final questions before we conclude. Bear with me a tick. No, there's no other questions, but as David said, it sounds like some of you do have David's email address and have been in liaison with him. Again, if you've got my email address, so by all means contact me with any questions that you have after the sessions that you think of, or if you need any more guidance or have an opinion as to how we can offer CBA support in January and February next year. Okay, I think that just leaves us to conclude the session, David.
Yep. Do you want to launch the final poll?
Oh, sorry,
given that there's only three areas on the call, I don't mind if we. I mean, we sort of picked it up, but if I just.
Yeah, I'm going to launch it as it's there.
As we. So everybody who's still on, so we've been asking this question in the webinar we ran last week and the 3 follow-up webinars we got this week, just to understand for those sessions in January and February what it would be best to focus on. So obviously we've only got 3 areas on this call, so just be interested to know. So one of you saying it's about understanding your cohort, another about forecasting impact. Okay, I mean, on those, obviously we can pick up individually with you the key challenge that we face and spend more time considering how we overcome that. But it's good to see that lack of capacity, lack of technical skills, I think also from Friday's poll, Jim, that those aren't coming out as too great a challenge, which is good, because we can always overcome the technical stuff. The thing that we can't overcome is the lack of time or stuff like that.
Okay. Well, can I just thank you, David, for your time this morning, and also thank those who've dialed in. We knew it was going to be a small group, as I said, because there's only 7 of you who have a sort of focus on health. But thank you for making the time. I say we'll forward the links on to you and materials over the next 24 hours, and it would be good to get your feedback if you can email me about how you'd like to see the support going forward before I reach a decision in the new year. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for dialing in, and thank you, and the session is now concluded. Thank you.
Bye.